Hi, I'm Victor Ndukauba. I'm an under 40 CEO.
The African Renaissance. The concept that the African people and nation shall overcome the current challenges confronting the continent and achieve cultural, scientific, and economic renewal is here, with young men and women taking the lead. Some call them the new school heroes. We call them under 40 CEOs.
All right, so let's talk investment. How, where, when should or would you advise a young businessman to put his funds at the moment?
The first thing we'd normally look at for everyone who we engage with when we discuss investments, to set the profile. And what does that mean? So every individual has their unique preferences. What are your personal life choices? Are you the kind of person who loves to party once a year, host parties? You like to travel the world, every year, on a vacation with your wife and your children? And when you travel, do you go business class or do you go economy? Are you the kind of person that perhaps can't afford that, but would rather travel to the country, once a year, perhaps at Christmas? And what is the cost implication? What kind of education do you think your students deserve, and what kind of schools do you send them to? And therefore, that has implications. What's your business? Are you are you an entrepreneur? Are you a salaried individual? And therefore, do you earn income on a regular, specific, cycle, or are your incomes, sort of somewhat unpredictable, but they could be lumpy? And then once you've established the profile of the individual and then understand their risk appetite, which is the next thing, how much risk are you willing and able to take? And then setting all of those as, side by side with the profile, you then essentially design a portfolio strategy for the individual. And all of that is then captured within what we like to call an investment policy statement, where you say, look, these are your personal preferences, these are your objectives in life, these are your goals, or perhaps I'd like to live a steady, smooth sailing lifestyle, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing flashy, but I'd like to build up a very solid, platform, such that even 10, 15, 20 years, my kids say they want to go to school in Harvard, undergraduate, or to do a master's, I should be able to write a check and not have to worry too much. Or if you said, my goal is to retire at a certain age, and then, segue into something else, are you getting yourself ready for that? Do you need to perhaps begin to build new skills? Do you need to go back to school to get new sort of trainings? Do you need to begin to build a totally different relationship bank in order to make that transition? How do you want to fund it? Or are you into public sector? Do you not earn great salaries? And on like that. So there's a lot of that engagement at the outset to lay the framework before you then begin to actively say, well, these are the areas we should consider. For younger people, and I'm talking fresh graduates, young professionals, 5-10 years of experience, early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s, you could begin to plan around what is a more risky bet when you're building a portfolio. So at that level, where you reckon that the individual has probably 20-25 years to go career-wise, you could then say, well, you know what, perhaps I could take a bit more risk in designing a portfolio for you. So maybe I'll skew your portfolio 60%, 70% in favor of more risky bets, buy you equities. But in doing that, again, you also have to be careful. What are you building for? In which case you've got to then make investments in defensive stocks, stocks that hold value regardless of the fluctuations in the economy, or companies that represent less volatility, in that space. You have people who are in their midlife, stages, 40s, 50s, they've been working for 15, 20 years. They can take a bit of risk, but they're getting closer and closer to when they need to retire, in which case the portfolio needs to be more balanced. And then you have those who are either close to or just about retiring, 50s, 60s, 25, 30 years of service, 35 years. And at that point, you can't afford to take too many bets. that are risky. So you then go for the safer investments, in which case a portfolio for someone of that nature will be skewed heavily towards fixed income. And by fixed income, I'm talking about bonds and other perhaps midterm investment opportunities. You may want to hold a bit of money markets, treasury bills, commercial paper for liquidity purposes, so that when there are immediate cash needs, you are not too far away from cash. So those are the broad guidelines. But ultimately, it all comes down to the individual and what his personal goals and expectations and lifestyle choices are.
It's quite enlightening, I must say. Well, tell me, how has travel and interacting with different cultures helped to shape your person and, impacted even your firm?
When I joined PwC, I think that was 2005, there were about 300 plus professionals across the firm, several of whom had either lived and worked in other jurisdictions, including North America, in Europe, Asia, several, in some cases, I can't speak specifically to the ratios now, but a very sizable contingent of non-Nigerians on payroll in the firm, and I'm talking a lot of Africans, from Accra, Zambia, Kenya, Mauritius, Tanzania, Uganda, South Africa, Egypt, India, even to a certain degree, so that broad diversity of professionals meant that from the get-go, even though I schooled in University of Lagos, I've lived in Lagos and worked in Lagos, and done everything in Lagos all my life, virtually. I was already exposed to the diversity of a rich culture of a rich, diverse culture of individuals. So who brought different work ethics, different cultural nuances to the work environment. Such that you had to learn to curtsy to the guy who was from Asia, who needed to eat spices that perhaps you consider too hot for yourself. When you went out to dinner, you needed to order as a group, or in discussing certain issues or approach to work, you meant that that was, it helped to shape your perspectives. And I think by the time I joined Afrinvest as well, I found something similar to that. Ike, having lived and worked in New York at Goldman, moved to Citi in London before coming back to Nigeria. Godwin also had lived in the US. Philip founder in the US, worked in McKinsey. They essentially built a firm that had a very global outlook, even though it had very local applications and deep local relationships. And by virtue of their background and training and profile, they were able to attract quite a number of expatriate talents across Africa as well. So I had colleagues. In fact, the head of HR who hired me at the time was Kenyan, June, and we had colleagues from Ghana, from Senegal, from Mali, Sierra Leone, Cameroon. It was a rich portfolio of individuals, and then even for the Nigerians who were on board, many of whom had lived and worked abroad as well. It was clear that it was a very eclectic mix of individuals.
So you and your team have gotten numerous nods, accolades, awards over the years. What do these awards, accolades, nods, recognition, what do they mean to you?
A reflection again of the firm and what its values are. Afrinvest is a firm that likes to believe and work as a firm that is innovative. It's one of our core values is innovation, and what that has meant is we would normally look at every situation as something that is not impossible, or having championed a lot of firsts in our market. So those firsts, more or less announce the firm on the global stage and even the local market.
This is Under 40 CEOs.
Over the years, Victor has led teams on varying projects and is considered a leader of repute. However, we must glean from him key insights into human resource issues.
So we all know that human resource, is a key element to consider when building any enterprise at whatever level. How would you advise a startup or a young budding business to hire?
That's a very fundamentally important question. Like I mentioned earlier when I was speaking, I think human capital is perhaps the the most critical element, if you ask me, of building any business, yes, you could talk about the product, you could talk about your markets, but, no matter how great a product you have, or no matter how great the idea or great a position you occupy in the market, if you have the wrong people, ultimately the business is going to crash. It's going to come crashing down. There's a joke I heard once. I'm not sure if it's PwC or much earlier here in Afrinvest, but it says, look, if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. So there's a trade-off ultimately, right, between the kind of remuneration you offer and therefore the quality of the human capital you attract. There is a lot that goes into the work environment, the culture, if whether or not the staff think it's supportive of career progression. Do they feel that they get assigned leadership, or they're allowed to take responsibility early? Is there accountability? Is the environment seen to be fair in assessing their performance and their returns? So those are critical elements, really. So for starting up, sometimes I think also is important, however, to realize that given the nature of business today, where you perhaps need less investment in hard assets, you don't need to get an office space actually fairly early on now, given the advent of the internet and cloud technology. If someone has a great idea, it's about identifying the individuals who have the right mix of skill sets or competencies that perhaps as an entrepreneur you do not have, and trust their judgment enough to relinquish control in those areas that not to be strong. If, for example, you want to build a fashion business or an IT business and you're a solid developer, you can write code from to take people from here to heaven and back. But you've got to market the service. So you've got to find somebody who understands what it means to do branding and marketing, who understands what it means to do sales and positioning. You've got to have people who can help you run your back office, keep your operations lean and efficient. Can you get people to trust and to buy into your vision so strongly that they are willing to let you essentially direct or show them what is the path towards where they should be headed, but give them sufficient leeway to experiment and to essentially try out things.
So earlier you mentioned, Coyote Farm, now of blessed memory, talking about your leadership qualities and how you were qualified for this role. But do tell me, how would you describe your leadership style?
Incidentally, the first time I encountered that question was while I was doing my MBA. I had to take this personality profile test to determine what I was, and I recall that you had those 4 letters, and then it spoke to who you were as an individual, your strengths, your weaknesses, as well as profiled some very popular global citizens who share the same traits. And I recall one of the things that got me excited at the time, this was 2016, was that I shared the same profile with Einstein and Barack Obama.
Oh, wow.
But again, it's one of those things, But I think ultimately, it comes down to, in terms of strengths, one is this a desire to have things done and done right. On the one hand, you have people say, well, perhaps there's a perfectionist type of personality in there, but just wanting excellence. Whatever is worth doing well. If I choose to apply myself to something, then I keep at it. You just be tenacious, dogged. There's a bit of focus, but again, given my personality, I can be empathetic. So the emotional side of me connects to people. And so when I work with colleagues or I work with people, I would very much like for us to be friends and to be friendly. Although we don't need to be friends to work together, but it would be nice, it would be a bonus if we actually got along as friends. And the reason is simple, when you think about the amount of hours you put in a work life, average week you're doing at the minimum, some will say 40-hour weeks, we are doing 85, but we do much longer hours in investment banking. So On average, I'll do 60-hour weeks. If I'm here some days, 10 hours working with people, then it would be great if we all got along as friends, right? So, and I guess personality-wise, I tend to like to put myself in other people's shoes. How would I feel if I was in this person's shoes and this happened? So what that does for you, it allows you sometimes to weigh your decisions a bit more carefully because you're thinking about the broader impact. But then also, you also have to be firm, So sometimes you've got to take very tough decisions. Sometimes you've got to exert a bit of, discipline, which is to insist that certain things are done a certain way. If there are policies, you try to be consistent about it. Try not to create a platform or an avenue for people to say, oh, perhaps, you're not consistent, you did this for this person, you didn't do it for that person. And, avoid controversies like that. So it makes it easier to manage people because they recognize that, look, this is what it is and this is how it's going to be. But also allows, you've also got to be flexible sometimes, So my approach is often to allow people latitude. If there's a task to be done or there's an assignment, rather than micromanage or tell you how I think it should be done, I would rather say, look, this is what I'd like for you to deliver. You have this much time, and I'll allow you to kind of discover on your own, way. Just go on your own journey of self-discovery. Find out how best you will be able to achieve the objective. So long as you meet the target. If you're struggling, let me know very early. So if I can help, I will come in and help. If there are going to be delays in deliverables, let me also know early so I can manage expectations, both for the clients and internally. But I think ultimately, those are typically my outlook.
This is Under 40 CEOs.
I know that I failed at some point as a leader. Tell me really quickly, what are your failings as a leader?
Because I have a tendency to want to deliver the perfect object. So it's a perfect letter, it's a perfect pitch, it's a perfect model. That penchant for perfection means that sometimes you overcook things. As a leader, you've got to be entrepreneurial. So sometimes, just sitting back and trying to create the perfect blend of the environment, the situation, the opportunity, and the product means that the opportunity moves and you've missed it. So it was something I recognized, again, through that journey of self-introspection. And I realized, sometimes you've got to go your instinct. It's not every time you've got to, use your analytics or your intellect. So sometimes you've got a gut feel that, do this. You make a go at it. And I could say, for example, there was once where we had an opportunity to, I had the gut feel that we needed to send the pitch to a certain prospect who I felt, this person might need this service, he might need to raise capital, might need to do this. The opportunity is right. But in the process of trying to get a consortium together with a few other professionals, get an accountant, get a law firm, put together the perfect product, we sort of missed the deadline by maybe an hour or two, and so that's one example of a failing. Sometimes it's also come down to identifying potential in people. There's something my MD calls inbreeding, which is you tend to want to hire people that are like you because you see yourself in the person. Oh, this person almost reminds me of myself. Therefore, you want to hire the person because you think that's what you need. Whereas sometimes he says, no, hire the person who is directly opposite. Maybe study something unrelated, So he would rather have in a room an eclectic mix of diverse experience and says, I'd rather have someone who did maybe theater arts in the room with me when we're discussing the markets or perceptions than me thinking if I had everyone who has the finance background in Goldman and did, an MBA, because that diversity in the room ensures that we're able to get a different perspective, So I've begun to recognize that is a failing in the sense that in the past, if I was going to hire people, I look for people who are just like me or people who I thought fit a certain profile. Now I'm a bit more deliberate about what I'm looking for. And, sometimes when I have the option or the luxury, or should I call it the challenge of picking, say, one candidate out of 6, given the fact that, look, things are tough out there for graduates, so there are very few opportunities, and many times you've got 3-4 fantastic candidates who meet your expectations, and what you perhaps have is just one opening. So these days, in trying to hire people, sometimes you're like, okay, well, if I had 2 choices out of 6, what would I pick? Would I pick the 2 who best fit the profile I think I need, or would I consider hiring one person who looks like fish out of water? Because perhaps that is what you need to stoke that genius of innovation, because the person doesn't conform and might just bring a different approach to doing things.
That's an amazing perspective. I'd like to get your take on the so-called work-life balance debate. I know you're married with 2 children, I believe.
Yes.
Do you think it's achievable, or is it a myth?
It's both a myth and an achievable benchmark. But I guess the way to answer this question really, it comes down again to the individual and what is important to you. And identifying and recognizing those values fairly early. I as an individual, I like to think of myself as someone who likes to think of family first. My faith is obviously important because I'm an individual who thinks that success in life is not just down to one's efforts. I think that there is a place for a supreme being, a divine force that helps to drive and shape things. And ultimately, I'm focused on finance. Between that tripod of values and considering I think family is critical, I like to think that it's important to make time for family. So how I try to strike a balance is, in an industry where many times it requires a lot of travel, a lot of executive face time with senior people, and therefore meetings, you're quite on the road. You have to spend long hours reviewing documents, working with your team to look at the quality of analysis that has gone into either a product or a service or some support or a deliverable to a client. We typically would often work very long hours sometimes. Sometimes the demands of the job is such that you have very tight deadlines and you've got to sometimes even work through the night. So you have analysts in the office trying to get the document ready, send it to you at 1 a.m. You've got to wake up at 2, review, turn it back, and the guy has to get it done by 6 so that I can be ready at 8 a.m. So your meeting at 9 happens in order to close a deal, or perhaps to deliver on a deadline where you have to file at the Securities and Exchange Commission or something like that. Now, recognizing that my work week is pretty intense, what I like to do sometimes is if I figure that, look, my kid's bedtime is 8:30, and maybe I've missed being there at bedtime on a Monday and a Tuesday, on a Wednesday I could decide to leave the office at 7, so I get home early enough, spend time with them, play, and then tuck them into bed, because my wife has done that for Monday and Tuesday. But then what I then do is I take whatever pending work I have home with me, so that after they've gone to bed, I could then stay up until about midnight, and then finish up whatever needs to be done. Now, for me, I'm pretty nocturnal, so I find it hard to sleep early. If I do, I wake up too early. So that has, for me, worked. But then what else? The other thing I then do is try and keep my weekends as free as possible, particularly Saturdays. So I try not to fix any meetings on Saturdays because I want to be home with the kids. So wake up Saturday morning. Sometimes I make breakfast. Tell my wife, let's take it easy. See with the kids are dining, feed them. We just watch cartoons together. Okay, look, how did your week go? What happened in school? Your friends. Did you get into a fight? With who? And then suddenly they're opening up to you. Because I think it's important that kids learn to be comfortable with their parents and be able to converse and to trust them enough to engage in conversations, such that when they begin to grow old and they need to then open up with you about their personal challenges, it doesn't become an alien practice that they're trying to instill. And then ultimately, when I do get a chance to travel sometimes, I'm out of town, of course, there's all of these technology tools that allow you to interface with them. And ultimately, video calls, and when you're coming back, buy 1 or 2 things that demonstrate that, look, I think you're important and you're valuable. And for my wife, it's a lot difficult now. We used to typically have a day of the week, that we typically dedicate to ourselves. In the evenings, just chill, no distractions. But what we're trying to do is at least once a month, have a date night where it's just 2 of us and nothing else. Yeah, but it's tough. But it takes a deliberate, active engagement to achieve.
To make it work.
Yeah.
All right, amazing. So tell me, what's the biggest letdown you've experienced in your career so far?
Or sometimes you're working with a client and you sort of anticipated an outcome and you try to prevent it. It could be a letdown, but I don't dwell on a lot of negative stuff. I just chalk it down to experience. I learn the lessons I need to learn, and I very quickly move on.
This is Under 40 CEOs.
Victor is a professional with a 60-hour work week and limited time to waste. However, when he does have the time away from work, what are his lifestyle choices?
So I have a few quick fire questions for you. What do you love to eat?
I don't have any particular favorite meal, but I enjoy meals that are well done.
So how would you describe your style?
Laid back, easygoing.
What are your favorite brands to wear?
I'm brand agnostic.
Okay. So what other CEOs do you currently look up to?
I admire Tony Edumelu. I admire Liko. The CEO I've worked closest with and I admire the most is Ike Chioke, my current group managing director.
All right. So what's your favorite car to drive?
But I guess it's my current car. I like a Lexus.
Okay. What's your favorite travel destination?
Madrid.
Okay. What's your favorite book of all time?
Startup Nation.
What book are you reading right now?
It's a book by Weber Boa about the history of Nigerian football.
Amazing. So lastly, I would like to know, Victor, what makes you happy?
Time with family, surely. Success, and of course, when my team wins.
All right. Thank you for coming on Under 40 CEOs, Victor.
Thank you, Fab. My name is Victor Ndukauba, and you too can be an Under 40 CEO.
This is Under 40 CEOs.